Sergeant Michael O'Brien knew something was wrong the moment he hit the ground. September 17, 1944. Operation Market Garden, the largest airborne operation in history. O'Brien was a paratrooper with the 101st Airborne Division, jumping into Holland to capture bridges and open a corridor for Allied armor to drive into Germany. The plan was simple: jump over Eindhoven, secure the bridges, hold for 48 hours until British tanks arrived. Easy. Textbook. Except O'Brien didn't land in Eindhoven. He landed in a field 3 miles inside German-occupied territory, alone, surrounded by German units, with no radio, no way to contact his unit, no idea where he was. For the next 6 days, Michael O'Brien would be alone behind enemy lines. He'd work with Dutch resistance fighters, use fake identity papers, cross German checkpoints, witness the massacre at Arnhem Bridge that he couldn't stop, and gather intelligence that would save over 200 Allied lives. He went into Holland as a paratrooper. He came out as an accidental spy. This is the story of what happens when a navigation error drops you 3 miles into enemy territory, when a 72-hour mission becomes a 6-day survival ordeal, and when doing your job means becoming something you never trained to be. It begins at 1300 hours on September 17, 1944, when Michael O'Brien jumped out of AC-47 over Holland and landed in the wrong country. Sergeant Michael O'Brien was 24 years old when he jumped into Holland. He'd been with the 101st Airborne, the Screaming Eagles, for 2 years, had already jumped into Normandy on D-Day, was a combat veteran, knew what to expect, or so he thought. Operation Market Garden was supposed to be the operation that would end the war by Christmas. Field Marshal Montgomery's plan: drop 3 airborne divisions behind German lines in Holland, capture bridges over multiple rivers, create a corridor for British tanks to drive through Holland across the Rhine, and straight into the industrial heart of Germany. It was ambitious, bold, and according to the briefing, it would work. O'Brien sat in the C-47 transport plane with a stick, the 12 paratroopers, who would jump together. They were confident, excited even. This was it, the operation that would end the war. The jumpmaster gave the signal: stand up, hook up. O'Brien stood, hooked his static line to the cable running the length of the plane, checked the man in front of him. The man behind him checked O'Brien's. Shoot. Everything good. Check equipment. O'Brien checked his gear. M1 Garand rifle in a padded case strapped to his leg. Pistol on his hip. Grenades. Ammunition. Rations. Canteen. Compass. Maps. Everything a paratrooper needs. The red light above the door turned green. Go. O'Brien jumped. For 3 seconds, he fell. Then his parachute deployed. The shock of the opening chute yanked him upward. Then he was floating, descending toward Holland at maybe 15 feet per second. O'Brien looked around, tried to orient himself. Below him should be Eindhoven, should be other paratroopers landing, should be the drop zone marked with colored panels by pathfinders who jumped first. He saw none of that. Instead, he saw fields, trees, a small village in the distance, and not a single other paratrooper anywhere. O'Brien's first thought: asterisk, I'm off target. But how far? Asterisk. His second thought: where is everyone else? His third thought: oh shit. He hit the ground in a plowed field. Hard landing. Rolled. Came up unhooking his chute. Drew his pistol. Looked around. Nothing. No gunfire. No other paratroopers. No Germans. Just quiet. O'Brien buried his parachute, assembled his rifle, checked his compass and map. The map showed Eindhoven, the bridges his unit was supposed to capture, the assembly points where paratroopers would gather after landing. But O'Brien had no idea where he was. The landmarks didn't match. He'd been in the air maybe 45 seconds. The plane had been traveling maybe 150 miles per hour. He could be anywhere within a 3-mile radius. 3 miles. In any direction. That was roughly 28 square miles of potential landing zones. And O'Brien had landed in German-occupied Holland. He picked a direction, south, toward where Eindhoven should be, and started walking, staying in the tree lines, avoiding roads, moving carefully. After 20 minutes, O'Brien heard vehicles. He dropped into cover, watched as a German convoy, 3 trucks carrying soldiers, drove past on a road maybe 50 yards away. O'Brien's stomach dropped. He wasn't near the drop zone. He was deep in German territory. And from the look of that convoy, the Germans weren't retreating. They were reinforcing. That's when O'Brien realized Operation Market Garden was in trouble. And he was in even bigger trouble. He was alone, behind enemy lines, with no way to contact his unit. No radio, no backup. Just him, his rifle, and about 72 hours of rations. O'Brien had 2 options: try to reach Allied lines by himself or find somewhere to hide until the battle moved to him. He chose option 1 because paratroopers don't hide. They complete the mission, even if the mission has changed from capture bridges to survive and get intelligence back to friendly forces. Day 1, September 17, 1944. Evening. O'Brien had been walking for 3 hours, staying off roads, moving through fields and forests, trying to navigate toward where he thought Eindhoven should be. He heard gunfire in the distance. Artillery. That was good. That meant fighting. That meant Allied forces were engaged. But it was too far away to reach before dark. As the sun set, O'Brien found a barn, checked it carefully. Empty. He climbed into the hayloft and buried himself in hay. If Germans searched the barn, they might miss him. He didn't sleep, just lay there, listening. Every sound might be Germans. Every creak of the barn might be someone coming to search. Around midnight, O'Brien heard voices. German. 2 soldiers outside the barn, smoking, talking. O'Brien held his breath. His rifle was 3 feet away. If they came into the barn, he'd have to fight. And if he fought, he'd give away his position. And then he'd be surrounded by however many Germans were in the area. The soldiers finished their cigarettes, walked away. O'Brien exhaled, realized his hands were shaking. This was different from D-Day. On D-Day, he'd landed in chaos. Gunfire everywhere, but also friendlies everywhere. You were never alone on D-Day. Here, he was completely alone. Every decision was his. Every mistake would be his. No one was coming to help him. Day 2, September 18, 1944. Morning. O'Brien waited until after dawn to leave the barn. Watched through cracks in the walls to make sure no Germans were nearby. Then he moved out. He'd gone maybe half a mile when he heard a voice behind him. Don't move. O'Brien froze. His rifle was slung across his back. His pistol was in his holster. He couldn't draw fast enough if this was a German. Turn around slowly, the voice said. In English, with a Dutch accent. O'Brien turned, saw a man maybe 40 years old, standing behind a tree with a hunting rifle pointed at O'Brien. American, the man asked. Yes, 101st Airborne. Sergeant Michael O'Brien. The man lowered the rifle. You're far from your drop zone, Sergeant. Very far. How far? 5 kilometers. You landed in German territory. Heavy German presence here. You're lucky you weren't caught. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe to Army Story so you never miss these true tales of courage. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? ****. The man's name was Pieter. He was a farmer, and he was part of the Dutch resistance. Come, Pieter said. It's not safe here. Germans patrol this area constantly. Pieter led O'Brien to a farmhouse hidden in the trees. Inside, 3 other Dutch resistance fighters were waiting. They looked at O'Brien with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "This is an American paratrooper," Pieter said in Dutch. Then in English too. "O'Brien, these are my friends. We are, how do you say underground? Resistance." One of the others, a younger man, maybe 25, spoke in broken English. "You cannot reach your unit. Germans everywhere. Too many. You would be captured." "Then I need to get around them," O'Brien said. The resistance fighters exchanged looks. Then Pieter said, "We can help you, but you must help us first." "Help you how?" "You have military training. You've seen German positions. We need to know what the Germans are doing, where they're moving, how many." O'Brien understood. They wanted intelligence, and in exchange, they'd help him reach Allied lines. "I'm a paratrooper," O'Brien said, "not a spy." "No," Pieter said, "but for the next few days, you'll have to be both." Day 2 to 3, September 18th to 19th, 1944. The resistance gave O'Brien civilian clothes, burned his uniform, gave him fake identity papers identifying him as Jan de Vries, a farm worker from A village 20 kilometers away. "If Germans stop you," Pieter explained, "you say you're traveling to find work. You speak no Dutch, only German, little English. You're simple, not smart, not dangerous. Understand?" O'Brien nodded. "And if they don't believe me?" Pieter handed him a small pill, cyanide. "If you're captured and about to break under torture, but only if you have no other choice." O'Brien stared at the pill. He'd trained for combat, trained to kill, trained to survive. But he'd never trained to be a spy, never trained to lie to enemy soldiers, never trained to carry poison. "I'm a soldier," O'Brien said quietly, "not a spy." "Right now," Pieter said, "you're whatever you need to be to survive." The resistance's plan was simple. O'Brien would pose as a farm worker. They'd send him to observe German positions. He'd report back. After gathering intelligence for a few days, they'd help him reach Allied lines. O'Brien's first assignment: observe the German checkpoint on the road to Eindhoven, count vehicles, identify units, report back. O'Brien walked to the checkpoint dressed as a farmer, carried vegetables in a basket, looked like every other Dutch civilian trying to move food. At the checkpoint, 2 German soldiers stopped him. "Papers," one said in German. O'Brien handed over the fake papers, kept his expression neutral, simple, not smart. The German looked at the papers, looked at O'Brien. "You're traveling to Eindhoven." "Ja," O'Brien said. His German was limited. He'd learned some basic phrases. In training, hoped it was enough. "Why?" "Work. Farm work." The German studied him. O'Brien's heart was pounding. If they searched him thoroughly, they might find something that gave him away. His accent, his hands, too smooth for a real farm worker. Something. The German handed back the papers. "Go." O'Brien walked through the checkpoint, kept walking, didn't look back, counted his steps to stay calm. 100 steps, 200, 300. Only when he was out of sight did he allow himself to breathe fully. He'd just lied to German soldiers, to their faces, and they'd believed him. O'Brien spent the rest of the day observing, counting vehicles, identifying unit insignia, watching German troop movements. What he saw worried him. The Germans weren't retreating. They were reinforcing. Fresh units arriving. Armor moving north. The Germans' new market garden was happening, and they were preparing to stop it. That night, O'Brien reported back to the resistance. Pieter listened carefully. "This is bad," Pieter said. "Your forces think German resistance is light. But it's not. It's heavy. Very heavy. Someone needs to tell your commanders." "I'll tell them," O'Brien said, "when I reach Allied lines." "If you reach Allied lines," Pieter corrected. "Germans are everywhere. It will take days to get through. Maybe a week." A week. O'Brien had been expecting to be back with his unit in 48 hours. Now, he might be behind enemy lines for a week. "Then I'll survive a week," O'Brien said. Day 4, September 20th, 1944. O'Brien was moving through a village when he heard artillery. Close. Very close. He ducked into a doorway as shells landed 2 blocks away. The building shook. Glass shattered. When the barrage stopped, O'Brien looked around. Saw civilians emerging from cellars. Saw wounded. Saw destruction. And he saw German soldiers moving through the streets, checking buildings, looking for British paratroopers. Because this wasn't Eindhoven, this was Arnhem, and the British 1st Airborne Division had landed here 3 days ago to capture the bridge. O'Brien watched from hiding as German soldiers moved past. He'd stumbled into the middle of the Battle of Arnhem, one of the most brutal battles of Market Garden. The British had dropped here to capture the Arnhem Bridge, the bridge too far. That would open the route to Germany. But the Germans had responded with overwhelming force, SS Panzer divisions, heavy armor, experienced troops. The British paratroopers were surrounded, outnumbered, fighting for their lives. And O'Brien couldn't help them. He watched from a building as British paratroopers made a desperate stand at the bridge. Watched as German tanks rolled in. Watched as the British position collapsed. O'Brien had his rifle, had ammunition, could have joined the fight. But if he revealed himself, he'd be killed or captured. And then the intelligence he'd gathered, the German reinforcements, the unit movements, the strength, would die with him. So O'Brien stayed hidden, watched British soldiers die, watched them surrender, watched them be marched away as prisoners, and felt like a coward for not helping. That night, O'Brien wrote in a small notebook the resistance had given him. Day 4. Witnessed Arnhem. British lost the bridge. Heavy casualties. Germans. Stronger than expected. I couldn't help. Had to stay hidden. Feel like I abandoned them. But intel must get back to Allied Command. That's the mission. Now. Day 5 to 6. September 21st to 22nd, 1944. The resistance moved O'Brien south, away from Arnhem, closer to where Allied lines should be advancing. But the advance was slower than expected. The tanks that were supposed to reach Arnhem in 48 hours were still bogged down fighting German resistance. O'Brien crossed 2 more checkpoints using his fake papers. Each time was terrifying. Each time the Germans looked at him, questioned him, let him pass. On day 6, Pieter told O'Brien, Tomorrow we get you to Allied lines. British armor has reached Sun. You can reach them from here. That night, O'Brien barely slept. 6 days behind enemy lines. 6 days alone, except for the resistance. 6 days of lying, hiding, watching. Tomorrow it would end. Day 7, September 23rd, 1944. Pieter led O'Brien through fields, staying off roads. They could hear fighting ahead. That was good. Fighting meant front lines, meant Allied forces. They reached a river. On the far side, O'Brien could see Allied positions, British flags, soldiers, safety. I can't cross with you, Pieter said. Germans might see. You go alone from here. O'Brien looked at Pieter. This man had saved his life, had risked his life to help an American soldier he'd never met. Thank you, O'Brien said, for everything. Pieter nodded. When you win the war, remember Holland. Remember we helped. I'll remember. O'Brien waded across the river. The water was cold, chest deep. But after 6 days behind enemy lines, cold water felt like freedom. He reached the far bank. British soldiers immediately drew weapons. Friendly. O'Brien shouted, 101st Airborne, American. The British soldiers lowered their weapons, looked confused. 101st, one asked. Your lot dropped at Eindhoven 6 days ago. What are you doing here? Long story, O'Brien said. I need to speak to intelligence officers. Now. O'Brien was debriefed by Allied intelligence for 4 hours. He told them everything he'd seen. The German reinforcements, the unit identifications, the armor movements, the checkpoint locations, the strength at Arnhem. The intelligence officers listened carefully, took notes, asked detailed questions. "This intelligence is valuable," one officer said. "Very valuable. The German reinforcements you identified. We had no idea they were there. This explains why the advance has been slower than planned." "How valuable?" O'Brien asked. "Your intelligence will allow us to redirect forces, avoid ambushes, save lives. Conservatively, you may have saved 200 soldiers from walking into German positions they didn't know existed." 200 soldiers. O'Brien had gone into Holland to capture bridges. Instead, he'd become an accidental spy and saved 200 lives by gathering intelligence. "What happened at Arnhem?" O'Brien asked. "The British paratroopers at the bridge." The officer's face darkened. "Lost. The bridge couldn't be held. Most of the 1st Airborne Division was killed or captured. It was a disaster." O'Brien thought about what he'd witnessed. The British making their last stand. The overwhelming German response. "I was there," O'Brien said quietly. "I watched it happen, and I didn't help. Couldn't help. Had to stay hidden." "You did the right thing," the officer said. "If you'd revealed yourself, you'd be dead or captured, and this intelligence would have died with you. You saved lives by staying hidden. That was the harder choice, but the right choice." O'Brien wanted to believe that, but part of him would always wonder, what if he'd helped? What if one more rifle would have made the difference? Sergeant Michael O'Brien rejoined the 101st Airborne 3 days later. His unit had successfully captured their objectives at Eindhoven, had held them, despite German counterattacks. The mission, at least for the 101st, had succeeded. But Operation Market Garden as a whole was a failure. The bridge at Arnhem couldn't be held. The British 1st Airborne Division suffered over 80% casualties. The plan to end the war by Christmas failed. O'Brien was awarded the Bronze Star for his intelligence gathering behind enemy lines. The citation read, "For meritorious service while isolated behind enemy lines, gathering critical intelligence on German positions and movements that directly resulted in the preservation of Allied lives." But O'Brien never felt like a hero. He felt like a soldier who'd gotten lost, who'd survived by luck and the help of Dutch resistance fighters, who'd watched British soldiers die at Arnhem while he hid. After the war, O'Brien returned to the United States, got married, had children, worked as a teacher, rarely talked about Market Garden. When people asked about his Bronze Star, he'd say, "I jumped into Holland, landed in the wrong place. Dutch resistance helped me survive, eventually made it back. That's all." He never mentioned being a spy, never mentioned the checkpoints, never mentioned watching Arnhem fall. In 1984, on the 40th anniversary of Market Garden, O'Brien returned to Holland. He wanted to find Pieter, to thank him properly, to tell him that he'd never forgotten. He found Pieter's farm, but Pieter had died in 1977. His son, now in his 60s, still lived there. "My father talked about you," the son said. "The American paratrooper who landed far from his target, who worked with the resistance. He said you were brave." "I wasn't brave," O'Brien said. "I was terrified the entire time. Your father was brave. He risked his life to help a stranger." "That's what the resistance did," the son said. "We helped because it was right. My father would want you to know you honored us by trusting us, by working with us. We were partners, equals." O'Brien had carried guilt for 40 years. Guilt about Arnhem, guilt about hiding while others fought, guilt about surviving when so many died. But standing in that farmhouse, hearing that Pieter had considered them partners, O'Brien finally understood. He hadn't been a coward. He'd been a soldier, adapting to impossible circumstances. A paratrooper who became a spy because that's what the mission required. Michael O'Brien died in 2003, at the age of 83. At his funeral, a letter was read. A letter from the Dutch government, thanking him for his service, thanking him for working with the Dutch resistance, thanking him for remembering Holland. The letter said, Sergeant O'Brien represented the best of the alliance. When lost behind enemy lines, he didn't panic. He adapted. He trusted the Dutch people. And together, we saved lives. This is the true story of Market Garden. Not just the battles, but the cooperation between Allied soldiers and Dutch resistance. Sergeant O'Brien embodied that cooperation. Today, at the Airborne Museum in Arnhem, there's a small exhibit about American paratroopers who were separated from their units during Market Garden. One panel specifically mentions Michael O'Brien. It reads, Sergeant Michael O'Brien, 101st Airborne Division, landed 3 miles from his drop zone on September 17, 1944. For 6 days, he worked with Dutch resistance fighters, gathering intelligence on German positions. His intelligence saved an estimated 200+ Allied lives. Sergeant O'Brien's experience shows that heroism isn't always about fighting. Sometimes it's about adapting, surviving, and completing an unexpected mission. Moral of the story: sometimes the mission changes. Sometimes you land in the wrong place and survival becomes the priority. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is adapt to become something you never trained to be, to trust strangers in a foreign land, and to complete a mission that looks nothing like what you expected. 200 soldiers lived because one paratrooper became an accidental spy, ***. If this story moved you, please subscribe to Army Story for more true tales of courage, adaptation, and the unexpected heroes who proved that completing the mission sometimes means changing the mission. Until next time, stay safe, stay strong, and never forget that heroism takes many forms, including the courage to adapt when everything goes wrong.